Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table of life? That question hung in Sarah's chest even before this morning, long before she found herself standing under the early California sun with her hands full of splintered cardboard targets. She was just the girl on the range, the one who carried stacks of replacements to the 500-yard berm, the one who swept brass when the military men were done leaving their shells on the floor. Invisible. That was the job. At least that's what she told herself. But then the silence broke. Not her silence, theirs. The Navy SEALs, the group that had owned the long-range section since dawn. The argument was sharp, jagged. A younger man's voice. Loud, defensive, bruised with frustration. Something's wrong with the rifle, it's not me. Sarah heard it clearly, though she wasn't meant to. She had been walking targets back from the line, her boots crunching gravel. And still, she could hear the tone of a man whose pride was bleeding. She paused, cardboard in her arms, eyes cast toward the firing line. 8 men, heavy shoulders, dark gear. The way they moved reminded her of her father's friends from long ago, men who carried themselves like their skin was stitched from discipline and silence. All but he was failing, she could see it. She'd been watching for an hour, though no one had noticed her eyes. His breathing wrong, his grip wrong, the snap of his trigger finger too violent, like a man hitting a button instead of coaxing a weapon to fire. She wanted to look away. She tried, but her father's voice came back, as if time had bent and delivered it straight into her ear. A craftsman never blames his tools. And in that moment, before her mind could stop her, her mouth opened. "The rifle's fine," she said. The words slipped out into the crisp morning air, too loud, too real. Every head turned. 8 pairs of eyes, hard, sharp, belonging to men who had carried rifles in places she would never see, shifted to a 23-year-old college student holding a bent target frame. Her heart dropped to the gravel. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to challenge anyone, especially not here, especially not them. But the look on his face, offense colliding with humiliation, said it was too late. The air went still. She should have apologized, should have ducked her head, gone back to hammering wooden frames into place. That's what the invisible range staff did. Stay quiet, stay useful, don't exist. But instead, Sarah stood there, her voice echoing inside her chest. "You're pulling your shots left," she added softly, as though a whisper could erase the weight of truth. Anticipating recoil. The silence stretched, too long, every second of it pressed against her skin. Scoffed, throwing a hand in the air. "She's kidding, right?" But Jake, the one they all deferred to, the one whose presence had steadied every moment since dawn, Jake studied her. His eyes didn't mock. They didn't dismiss. They cut through her, searching. "You think you can do better?" His voice was calm, not a challenge for humiliation but for truth. Sarah's breath caught. Her body wanted to run, but her mind wouldn't move. Her father's voice came back again, steady and unshakable. "Never make a claim you can't back up." She set the targets down. "I can try," she said. The world shifted. Jake bent, lifted the rifle had thrown down in frustration, checked the chamber like it was second nature, then handed it to her. The weight was heavier than she expected, more balanced, more foreign. This wasn't her father's rifle. This wasn't the gun she grew up with under the hot desert sun, where weekends were spent learning patience, not power. This was different, military, real. Barked out a laugh, his frustration now leaning on ridicule. "She changes targets for a living. You're really gonna." Jake silenced him with a look, then back to Sarah. 500 yards, same target he's been missing all morning. "You hit it, lunch is on me. You miss, you explained to my why you were holding my rifle." Her mouth went dry. 8 men, 8 warriors, 8 pairs of eyes she could feel pressing into her back before she even lowered herself into position. The gravel bit into her knees as she knelt. The stock pressed against her shoulder. Her hands moved instinctively, familiar though everything was different. She adjusted the cheek weld, ran her palm along the cool metal, feeling its weight. Her father's voice again, patience, precision, control your body under pressure. Before I shoot, she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard, can I show you what he was doing wrong? The SEALs exchanged glances, shook his head in disbelief, but Jake gave a single nod. Go ahead. Sarah shifted into abandoned position. Too much weight on the left elbow. She showed them, adjusted, showed them again. Gripped too tight, she loosened, demonstrated the steadiness. The grip should be like holding a bird, she whispered. Tight enough it can't fly away, gentle enough you don't hurt it. The silence was different now, not mocking, watching, listening. She explained trigger control, breathing, the natural pause between heartbeats. Frowned, but he was listening now. Even he couldn't deny her words were right. Finally she settled in, adjusted her position, felt the wind on her cheek. Her father's lessons lined up inside her head, like steady rounds in a magazine. Exhale, hold, pause. Squeeze, don't snatch. The world held its breath with her. The crack echoed, the recoil pushed back, dust rose at the target line. Dead center. She didn't move, didn't celebrate, just chambered another round, fired, then another. 3 shots, tight group. When she lifted her head from the scope, she met silence again. But this time it wasn't doubt, it wasn't mockery. It was awe. Jake lowered the spotting scope slowly, his expression unreadable. Then his voice carried, steady and calm. 3 shots, 2-inch group, dead center. The words hit the air like a verdict. Muttered something under his breath, but it didn't matter. Sarah handed the rifle back, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline had begun to drain. She'd done it. She'd outshot a SEAL in front of his team. But it wasn't pride that swelled in her chest. It was something quieter, heavier, her father's name, his reputation, carried into this moment without her meaning it. And for the first time, she felt the weight of what had just begun. Because Jake wasn't looking at her like she was a range worker anymore. He was looking at her like a question had just been asked. And she had just answered it. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. That was only the beginning. Why hadn't she kept her mouth shut? That question tore through Sarah's mind long after the echo of her shots had faded. She stood at the edge of the firing line, the rifle no longer in her hands, her pulse still hammering. The smell of burnt powder lingered in the air. The SEALs hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, not for long moments. Just eyes on her, like she had walked into their world uninvited and somehow stayed. She wanted to shrink, disappear back into her role, the girl who replaced targets and swept brass. But that door had already closed. She crossed a line without realizing it, and there was no way back. Jake's gaze stayed locked on her, steady, unreadable. His men shifted in the corner of her vision, but not him. Finally, he spoke. Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that? Her mouth opened, but the answer caught in her throat. The truth was simple. Her father. Long hours in the dust, the sound of cicadas in the desert, the steady voice that guided her hands when she was just 12 years old. But to say it aloud, to claim that heritage in front of them, felt like standing on a cliff's edge. My father, she managed, her voice cracked. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, retired, he taught me when I was a kid. Something shifted among the men. The one with gray at his temples, she thought she'd heard, let out a low whistle. Gunny Martinez, he asked. Sarah blinked. You know him. Know of him, corrected, but the respect in his tone was unmistakable. Scout Sniper School, legendary, turned average Marines into killers with precision rifles. Your old man's name carried weight. The blood rushed in Sarah's ears. She hadn't expected that, not here, not like this. Smirk faltered. The atmosphere changed. Suddenly she wasn't just a range assistant anymore. She was the daughter of a name that lived in their circles, in whispered stories of men who could read wind and distance like scripture. But pride was a fragile thing, and Sarah felt it twist in her chest, not the proud kind but the heavy kind. Because if she failed here, if she looked foolish now, she wouldn't just embarrass herself. She'd stain her father's name. She fought the urge to shrink under the weight. Jake studied her longer, then gave a small nod almost to himself. "That explains it," he murmured. But before she could breathe, before she could retreat into safety, a new presence approached. The black sedan rolled in slow, tires crunching over gravel. A man in navy dress blues stepped out, his cap precise, his bearing unmistakable. Authority radiated from him the way heat radiates off asphalt in summer. The seal straightened. Even Jake's shoulders shifted subtly. "Commander Harrison," Jake said quietly to her, "our co." Sarah's stomach dropped. She was still holding the dust of her father's name on her tongue, still trembling from the weight of their stares. And now she was about to be seen by a commander, standing among men she had no right to stand beside. Harrison's eyes swept the scene. "Chief," he said, his tone even, "how's the training progressing?" "Very well, sir," Jake replied. His voice carried the ease of a man who knew how to answer without. But then Jake hesitated. And with that hesitation, Sarah's fate shifted again. "We've had some unexpected assistance," Jake continued. "From one of the range staff, Miss Martinez, daughter of Gunnery Sergeant Martinez." Harrison's brows lifted ever so slightly. His gaze turned on her. Sarah felt her skin flush hot. She fought to keep her posture steady, though every instinct screamed to lower her eyes. "Martinez," Harrison repeated. "I know that name." He stepped closer. His eyes weren't unkind, but they were sharp, the kind that saw through pretenses, that measured truth. "And what sort of assistance have you been providing, Miss Martinez?" Her throat closed. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Jake stepped in. She diagnosed fundamental issues in technique. Then she demonstrated with a 3-shot group that would qualify for advanced standards. For a moment, Harrison didn't react. He studied Sarah the way one studies a new rifle, turning it over in his mind, considering weight, balance, potential. Then he walked to the spotting scope, bent, peered through. Sarah's chest tightened. Those shots, those 3 tiny holes punched into cardboard 500 yards away, they weren't supposed to matter this much. And yet, here was a commander studying them like scripture. When he straightened, his expression had changed. "That's not recreational shooting," Harrison said. "That's precision marksmanship at a level fit for competition teams." The words felt surreal, like they weren't hers to carry. "I'm a nursing student," Sarah blurted. "This is just part-time to pay tuition." "Recreationally," Harrison echoed, a trace of dry amusement in his voice. Then his eyes sharpened. "Talent like yours doesn't come along often. Don't underestimate it." And just like that, the ground under her feet shifted again. Had gone silent. The other SEALs exchanged looks, some impressed, some skeptical still, but all of them acknowledging her in a way they hadn't an hour ago. Jake's gaze lingered, thoughtful, weighing, calculating. And Sarah felt the strange clash of 2 worlds colliding inside her chest. The world she knew, schedules, exams, tuition bills, late nights in fluorescent-lit libraries. And this world, dust, rifles, the silence of men who measured their worth in shots that hit or missed. She hadn't asked to step into their world, but now she wasn't sure she could step back out. That night, long after the range had emptied, Sarah drove home with her windows down, the cool ocean air rushing past her face. Her father's voice echoed in her head, stronger than ever. "When opportunity knocks, you better be ready to answer the door." But she wasn't sure. Because what if the door led somewhere she wasn't meant to go? And what if, deep down, she wanted to walk through it anyway? She should have let it end there. A single demonstration, a fleeting moment of respect, and then fade back into anonymity. That would have been the safe path. but Sarah had never been good at walking away when something inside her whispered stay. The days that followed were not normal. She tried to pretend they were. Nursing school lectures filled her mornings, fluorescent lights buzzing above rows of restless students. Anatomy charts, lab coats, coffee gone cold in paper cups, the rhythm of the life she had chosen. But her mind drifted, back to the gravel under her boots, the rifle pressed against her shoulder, 8 men watching, their silence heavy, their judgment waiting, and the moment when silence cracked into awe. She replayed it when she closed her eyes at night, the crosshairs steady, the squeeze of the trigger, the puff of dust at 500 yards. It hadn't felt like luck, it had felt like home. Still, she tried to push it away, tried to tell herself it meant nothing. She was just the daughter of a Marine, just a student, just a girl with a part-time job. Until Jake walked back into her world. It was a week later. The range was quieter that morning. No SEALs, no SUVs, just a few civilians at the pistol bays and a pair of reservists checking their rifles before a weekend drill. Sarah was restacking targets, humming quietly to herself, when a shadow stretched across the counter. "Morning," Jake said. Her breath caught before she looked up. He wore no uniform today, just a simple t-shirt and jeans, but the weight of his presence was the same. "You're early," she managed. "Wanted to catch you before the day started." He leaned on the counter, eyes steady. "Commander Harrison approved it. I'd like you to observe one of our advanced sessions. Unofficial. Just watch. Maybe offer some insights if you see something." Her throat tightened. "Me." "You," he said simply. Every instinct screamed no. She wasn't ready. She wasn't qualified. She wasn't one of them. But another voice whispered louder, "When opportunity knocks." Her father's words again. The same words that had carried her through every hesitation since childhood. She nodded, because her heart had already decided what her mind was too afraid to say. That afternoon, Sarah found herself on the edge of a training range she'd never been invited to before. It was different here. Not the civilian range with its cracked concrete benches and worn target stands, but a military facility carved into hills and wind-carved ridges. The sound of rifles cracked through the air in steady rhythm, sharp and precise. She stayed near the edge, notebook in hand like a student pretending to belong. The SEALs barely acknowledged her presence at first, too focused on their drills, but Jake gave her a small nod, silent encouragement. For hours she watched, she listened, she studied, the way bodies shifted under recoil, the subtle impatience in shoulders, the unspoken competition in every glance exchanged between teammates. And then she saw it. The Marines had joined for a combined exercise that afternoon, scout snipers who prided themselves on their ability to hit at impossible distances. Yet their shots drifted, one after another, off the mark. The instructors barked corrections, pointed to wind flags snapping lazily in the breeze, but Sarah noticed something else. The topography, the way the hills bent the air. A crosswind funneled unseen between ridges, invisible to the flags, a pattern she'd seen before in the desert with her father, when mirage lines bent like water under heat. She hesitated. Who was she to speak up? But Jake caught her eye, raised his brow as if asking silently, "Well?" Her pulse thundered. She stepped forward. "I think it's the terrain," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "The wind's funneling through here differently than the flags are showing. If you watch the shimmer above the grass line, you can see it bending." The instructors paused. The Marines turned. A dozen hardened faces fixed on her at once. Jake's voice cut through, "Show us." Her knees wanted to buckle, but she forced herself to walk forward. She pointed, explained. Her father's lessons spilled out, how to read mirage, how to trust the terrain when the flags lied, how the smallest signs revealed the truth if you paid attention. They listened, they adjusted, they fired. The impacts shifted, closer, correct. The difference was immediate. When the last shot landed true, silence hung for a moment. Then one of the Marines let out a low laugh, shaking his head. "Well, I'll be damned." Word spread faster than she ever expected. The range girl who read Wind like a book, the daughter of Gunny Martinez, the one who outshot. By the time the sun set, Sarah's chest was tight with something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride, no, pride was fleeting. This was heavier, a sense of belonging, of purpose. But purpose had a cost. That night she sat across from her father at their small kitchen table, the smell of a roast con pollo filling the room. His hands rough and wrapped around a coffee mug. His eyes deep, steady, forever a Marine even in civilian clothes, studied her without words. Finally she spoke. "Dad, they want me to come back. Observe, maybe even teach." He didn't flinch, didn't look surprised. "I told you," he said quietly, "you've got a gift." Her throat tightened. "But I'm in nursing school, I'm supposed to." "You're supposed to use what you're given," he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "You think I taught you to shoot just so you could hit paper on weekends? No, I taught you because one day it might matter, and now it matters." Tears stung her eyes unbidden. She hated that, hated feeling weak in front of him. "I'm scared," she admitted. His eyes softened just for a moment. "Good. Fear means you understand what's at stake, but don't you dare let it stop you." She nodded, though the fear remained. Fear of failing, fear of being seen, fear of stepping into a world that wasn't meant for her. But beneath the fear a spark burned. A spark that told her maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And yet there was something she hadn't told her father. Not yet. Something she wasn't ready to admit even to herself. That when she lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, she didn't dream of hospitals and white coats anymore. She dreamed of wind and dust, of rifles steady against her shoulder, of silence breaking when a shot landed true. Why was she here? That question burned in Sarah's mind as she stood at the edge of the training pit, clutching her notebook so tightly the cardboard backing bent beneath her fingers. She wasn't a Marine. She wasn't a SEAL. She wasn't even out of college. Yet here she was, in front of a dozen men whose lives revolved around rifles, tactics, survival, and they were waiting for her to speak. Her palms were damp. Her pulse hammered against her throat. The sun bore down on the Virginia training facility, the air thick with humidity and the smell of dust kicked up by boots. A line of shooters lay prone, their rifles braced against bipods, scopes glinting in the light. She should have walked away, should have told Jake she wasn't ready, that she didn't belong in a place where silence and precision were currency. But she hadn't. She said yes. And now she stood here, on the edge of a world that didn't forgive pretenders. His voice broke the silence. "Sarah," the contractor said, her tone calm but expectant, "you're up." The dozen faces turned toward her, some curious, some skeptical, a few openly doubtful. She recognized the look. She'd seen it on civilians at the range before, men who thought they knew what competence looked like. But this time it was different. These weren't weekend warriors. These were professionals. Marines, Rangers, police snipers. Men who had already proved themselves in ways she could barely imagine. She opened her mouth, but for a moment nothing came out. Her father's words echoed, "Control your body under pressure." She drew a breath, forced her hands to loosen. "We're going to start with breathing," she said at last, her voice steadier than she felt. "Because if you don't control your breathing, nothing else matters." A ripple of silence passed over the group. A few raised brows. One man smirked faintly as if to say, "Breathing, that's your big lesson." Sarah swallowed but pressed on. "Most of you were taught to hold your breath on the shot," she continued. "That works until it doesn't, because holding too long builds tension, raises your heart rate, throws you off when you need steadiness the most." She dropped to the ground beside one of the shooters, mimicking his prone position. The gravel pressed sharp into her elbows. She let her cheek fall against her arm, just as she'd done since she was 12. Instead, she said, her voice quieter now, meant for them to lean closer. You breathe, normal, steady. And when you reach your natural pause halfway out, you let the rifle break on its own. You don't force it, you don't strangle it, you let it happen. Her finger pressed an invisible trigger. She closed her eyes, exhaled, stilled. Clicking. When she opened her eyes, the smirking Marine wasn't smirking anymore. He was watching her, really watching. Gave a small nod. Demonstrate. Sarah froze. She hadn't expected that, but the rifles lay waiting, and every pair of eyes was on her. She chose one at random, slid into place, adjusted the scope. Her breath steadied in her chest, even as her heart fought to race. She felt the wind brush against her cheek, noted the pull in the grass. Exhale, pause, squeeze. The crack rang out. Dust leapt at 600 yards. True. The silence that followed was different this time. Not disbelief, not doubt, something closer to respect, though still guarded. She rolled back, handed the rifle to its owner. Your turn, she said quietly. One by one they fired. One by one she watched, corrected, adjusted. The first hour was rough. Pride is a stubborn thing, especially in men trained to never admit weakness. But as rounds found their mark more consistently, as groups tightened, the skepticism began to thin. Until the fourth day. That was when it broke. The Marine sniper, older, grizzled, a man who had carried a rifle longer than Sarah had been alive, was failing. Again and again his shots drifted wide. His jaw tightened, his frustration clear. Sarah watched from the side, chewing at the inside of her lip. She saw it, the tension in his shoulders, the strain of muscles forced into a position that didn't fit his frame. She hesitated. Correcting had been instinct, correcting a Marine, a man with years in combat zones with scars she couldn't see. That felt like arrogance. But Jake's voice echoed from memory. Don't waste the chance to say what matters. She stepped forward. May I? She asked, her voice low. The Marine glanced up. His expression carried years of earned pride, and in that moment it looked sharp enough to cut. But then something in her tone must have reached him. He gave the faintest nod. Sarah crouched beside him, pointed to the angle of his arm, the strain across his back. You're built different, she said softly. Longer arms. The textbook position is forcing tension. Try this. She shifted his elbow, adjusted the stock against his shoulder, gave space for his frame to rest. He tried again, fired. The bullet struck true. He froze, then adjusted, fired again, another hit. Slowly he lowered his rifle, looked at her. For the first time his eyes held no skepticism, only curiosity. How did you see that? He asked. Sarah hesitated, then smiled faintly. I've been watching people shoot for over a year now. Everyone's body tells a story. You just have to learn how to read it. That night, as the group packed up, the same Marine approached her privately. I owe you an apology, he said gruffly. I thought you were just some civilian who got lucky with a few good shots. But you understand this stuff at a level most of us never will. Where did you really learn it? Her throat tightened. She thought of her father, of the weekends spent under the desert sun, of the way he'd spoken about rifles not as weapons, but as extensions of patience and control. From watching, she said softly, from listening, from trying to understand why things work, not just how to do them. The Marine nodded slowly, then offered his hand. She took it. When he walked away, Sarah felt something inside her shift again. It wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It wasn't about pride. It was about helping someone else find what they'd been missing. And that felt like something worth staying for. But as she packed her bag, approached, her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Sarah, she said, how would you feel about doing this full time? The word stopped her cold. Full time. It meant more than hours, more than money. It meant stepping through the door and never going back. She didn't answer right away. Couldn't. because the question that burned inside her now was heavier than any she'd faced before. What if she said yes? And what if saying yes meant giving up the life she thought she was supposed to live? What if she said yes? That question followed Sarah through the night, clinging to her like the scent of gunpowder that still lingered on her clothes. She tried to study, textbooks spread open across the kitchen table, coffee cooling in her cup, but the words blurred. Anatomy diagrams, pharmacology notes, case studies in neat print. They all looked meaningless against the memory of a Marine lowering his rifle, his voice thick with respect, asking her, "How did you see that?" She closed the book, sat in silence, and let the question breathe. His offer hadn't been casual. Sarah could see it in her eyes. Precision Training Solutions wasn't just looking for another name on a payroll. They wanted her, her perspective, her way of seeing. But wasn't this supposed to be temporary? Nursing was the plan, always the plan. Something steady, respectable, a way to help people. She promised herself that. She promised her father that. Yet here she was, heart tangled between two futures. The next morning, she drove to her father's house, the small one-story place with sun-bleached shutters and a porch swing that had long stopped squeaking only because he'd oiled it himself. He was on the porch when she pulled up, coffee steaming in his hand, as if he'd been waiting. "You've got something to tell me," he said before she'd even stepped out of the car. Sarah froze. "How do you always know?" Martinez chuckled softly. "Because I raised you, and because your face gives you away worse than any poker hand." She sat beside him, the wood warm under the morning sun. For a long moment, neither spoke. She sipped from the mug he handed her, the coffee dark and bitter, grounding. Finally, she said it. "They want me to do it full time." Her father didn't react, not right away. He just stared out at the street, at the slow rhythm of life passing by, a mail truck, a jogger, a neighbor sweeping his driveway. "And what do you want?" he asked at last. The question hit harder than she expected. "I don't know," she whispered. "Yes, you do." His tone wasn't harsh, just certain. "You wouldn't be sitting here if you didn't already know." Tears pricked her eyes. She blinked them back. "Dad, I wanted nursing because I thought it mattered, saving lives, helping people. But when I'm out there," her voice cracked. She swallowed hard. "When I'm out there, I feel like I belong, like I was built for it, and that scares me." Turned to her, his gaze steady, the same gaze that had once pinned her when she was 12 and flinched at the recoil of a rifle. He said softly, "Helping people doesn't always mean hospitals. Sometimes it means making sure the ones who go into the worst places come back alive. You think teaching them to shoot doesn't save lives. Every bullet that lands true might mean a father comes home, a mother, a brother. That matters too." Her throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak. "Don't choose out of fear," he added. "Choose because it's where your heart won't let you walk away." That night she called. Her voice shook, but the word came out clear. "Yes." And so it began. Her first assignment was in Virginia again, but different this time. Not just observing, not just demonstrating once or twice. She was on the schedule, listed as an instructor, though consultant was the official word. Her badge felt strange in her hand. The students this time weren't just Marines. They were Army Rangers, DEA snipers, FBI trainees. Hardened, skeptical, trained to measure worth in scars and service. Sarah stood before them, heart pounding. She introduced herself simply. "I'm Sarah Martinez. I'll be assisting with marksmanship training this week." She didn't add more, didn't try to convince them. She'd learned already words wouldn't win them, only results. The first 2 days were brutal, not because she failed, because they resisted. Questions asked with edge. Comments whispered just loud enough to sting. What can she know? She's never been in a firefight, never dragged a buddy out of the dirt. She bore it in silence, corrected quietly, explained patiently. By the third day, cracks appeared. A ranger struggled with shooting uphill, his rounds drifting low. Sarah crouched beside him, explained how gravity altered trajectory on inclined shots, showed him the holdover. His next round struck true. He looked at her differently after that. By the fifth day, even the skeptics leaned in when she spoke. It wasn't easy. Every night she returned to her hotel drained, the weight of proving herself pressing heavy. She'd collapse onto the bed, sometimes staring at the ceiling in darkness, wondering if she'd collapse under the burden of expectation. But then morning came, and she'd walk back into the heat, into the smell of dust and gun oil, and something inside her steadied. One evening, near the end of the course, a veteran sniper approached her. His hair was flecked with gray, his face lined from years of sun and stress. "I thought you didn't belong here," he admitted gruffly. "But you do. You see things most of us don't. You teach in a way we can actually hear. Don't waste it." She thanked him, but later, alone in her car, she wept. Not from sadness, not from pride, from the release of carrying so much doubt and finally feeling it loosen. Weeks turned into months, assignments blurred. Fort Benning, a law enforcement range outside Phoenix. She traveled between her nursing classes and her training contracts, living two lives that pulled at her in opposite directions. In one life she wore scrubs, carried textbooks, memorized dosages and procedures. In the other she lay prone in the dirt beside men with calloused hands and haunted eyes, teaching them to breathe steady, to trust physics, to let the rifle speak truth. The balance frayed her. She missed study groups, missed exams she had to retake. Once she arrived at a hospital rotation after a red-eye flight, her mind foggy, her eyes gritty. A supervisor scolded her for seeming distracted. And yet, when she stood on a firing line, all the fatigue vanished. The rifle steadied her in ways nothing else could. One night, after a grueling week training FBI HRT operators in urban shooting positions, she sat in her hotel room staring at her nursing notes. She realized she hadn't turned a single page in 2 hours. Her pen lay idle. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the training ground, to the men who had listened, who had improved, who had thanked her in quiet voices that carried the weight of everything they'd lived through. Her heart whispered what her mind feared: this isn't temporary anymore. But saying it out loud meant changing everything. She closed the book, sat in the quiet, and wondered if choosing one path meant losing herself in the other. How long could she keep living in two worlds? That question gnawed at Sarah as weeks bled into months, as her calendar became a puzzle of hospital rotations and training assignments, red-eye flights and rushed exams. She carried textbooks in her backpack and rifles in her memory, the weight of both pressing until her chest ached. At first she convinced herself it was possible, that she was strong enough, disciplined enough to walk both paths. By day she studied dosages, patient care, case studies. By night she lay in dirt beside rangers, SEALs, FBI operators, teaching them to breathe, to hold steady, to trust physics more than pride. But her body kept score. The first crack came on a Tuesday morning. She was in a hospital ward, standing over a patient bed with her stethoscope trembling in her hands. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Her notes blurred. When the attending asked a question, basic, routine, her mind went blank. Silence stretched. Her face flushed hot. A classmate jumped in with the answer. The attending moved on, but the look in his eyes stayed with her: disappointment. She carried it with her to the range that weekend, the memory heavy as she crouched beside a young DEA sniper struggling with his grouping. She corrected his grip, adjusted his stock, whispered the same lessons her father had once drilled into her. His shot landed true. Relief washed across his face. Gratitude flickered in his eyes. And Sarah felt torn in half. In one world she was failing. In the other she was saving someone from failure, which mattered more. The exhaustion grew. Her phone filled with alarms: wake up, study, catch flight, land, train, return, test. Sometimes she woke up in hotel rooms not knowing which city she was in, the curtains drawn tight against dawn. Her father noticed first. "You're burning at both ends," said one night, his voice low, his eyes shadowed by concern. "That candle doesn't last long." "I'm fine," Sarah lied. But he saw through her. He always did. "You don't have to prove yourself to everyone at once." His words dug deep, but she brushed them aside. Proving herself was all she knew how to do. Then came the breaking point. It was during a week-long FBI hostage rescue team course. Sarah had been flown in to consult on unconventional positions, shooting through barriers, using angles in urban settings. She threw herself into the work, adrenaline carrying her through days that stretched into nights. But on the fourth evening, when she returned to her hotel, she opened her laptop to review nursing notes. Within minutes, her eyes closed. She woke hours later, the screen still glowing, her assignment unfinished. The next day, her professor's email waited in her inbox. Missed submission. Academic probation warning. Her stomach dropped. That night, sitting alone in her car in a dark parking lot, she broke. Tears came hard, harder than she'd allowed in years. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, sobs shaking her shoulders. The pressure, the constant proving, the endless split, it was too much. She wanted to quit. But quit what? Nursing. The dream she'd carried for years. Or training. The calling that had come out of nowhere and rooted itself deeper than she'd expected. For the first time, she felt paralyzed. The next morning, she dragged herself back to the range. Her eyes swollen, her body heavy, her spirit cracked. She expected to stumble, to falter. Instead, something unexpected happened. During a break, one of the younger agents, barely older than she was, approached her. His hands fidgeted against his gear. His eyes darted, nervous. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say thanks. Yesterday, when you corrected my position, I haven't been able to hit consistent in weeks. I thought I wasn't cut out for this, but you gave me hope." Sarah blinked at him. His voice was earnest, raw. "Hope." The word hit her like a round to the chest. Because she realized in that moment what she had been blind to. Nursing had always been about helping people, about being there when lives hung in balance. But wasn't this the same? Weren't these men and women also fighting to protect lives, their own and others? And wasn't her role to help them, to sharpen them, to keep them alive, just another kind of care? The revelation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the exhaustion, the academic warnings, the fear, but it shifted something inside her. That night she called her father. Her voice was hoarse. "Dad, I don't know if I can keep both. I feel like I'm drowning." There was silence on the line. Then his voice came, steady, the way it always had. "Life isn't about doing everything. It's about doing the thing you can't walk away from." She closed her eyes, tears slipping free. She knew what he meant. She knew what he was really asking. And for the first time she admitted it, out loud. "I don't think nursing is it," she whispered. "I thought it was, but when I'm out there I feel alive. I feel like I matter." Her father didn't sound surprised, only proud. "Then follow it, don't look back." The decision didn't come all at once, but the seed was planted. In the weeks that followed, she still tried to juggle both. Still showed up in scrubs, still sat through lectures, still forced herself to balance equations of life. But her heart wasn't there anymore. Her heart was in the dirt, behind the glass of a scope, in the eyes of men and women who carried rifles not for pride, but for survival. The split life was ending. She could feel it. She just hadn't yet found the courage to choose. But choice was coming, and it would demand everything. When do you finally admit you've changed? That question haunted Sarah as she stared at the letter on her desk. Her nursing school crest at the top. The words clear, final, dismissal for failure to meet academic requirements. She'd known it was coming. Probation warnings, missed assignments, classes attended in body but not in mind. She could almost hear the disappointment in her professor's voice even as she read the ink. Still, the reality cut deep. For years, nursing had been the dream, the plan. a way to carry her father's sacrifices into something meaningful, something steady. She'd imagined herself in white shoes and scrubs, guiding patients through pain, offering comfort. And now, it was gone. Not because she wasn't capable, but because she hadn't chosen it with her whole heart. Her hands trembled as she folded the letter. She expected shame to come, regret, a sense of failure heavy enough to crush. Instead, there was only relief. For the first time in months, her chest felt lighter. The war inside her, nursing against marksmanship, was over. The door had closed, and another one waited wide open. That same evening called, her voice brisk, steady, but warm underneath. "Sarah, I've got an assignment. Army Rangers at Fort Benning. They want advanced wind reading and ballistics instruction. You're the first name I thought of. Can you be ready in 2 days?" Sarah stared at the folded letter still sitting on her desk, one door closing, another knocking. "Yes," she said. Her voice didn't shake this time. 2 days later, she stepped onto the red dirt of Georgia, the heat heavy on her shoulders, her badge clipped to her vest. She was no longer a student splitting her time. She was Sarah Martinez, civilian instructor. The Rangers didn't welcome her easily. Some were polite, some skeptical, some openly doubtful. The same cycle she'd seen before, but now she had nothing to hold back. No classes to run to, no exams waiting, no other world pulling at her sleeve. She threw herself into the training, reading wind through tree lines, calculating drop at extreme distances, demonstrating not just how to shoot, but how to think when the shot mattered more than pride. On the third day, she faced her first real test. One of the Rangers, a young sergeant, was struggling. His shots drifted, frustration mounting. Sarah crouched beside him, pointed out the subtle crosswind funneling between tree lines. He frowned. "I don't see it." "Watch the shimmer," she said softly. "The way the air bends above the grass. It's subtle, but it's there. Trust it." He fired. The round struck true. His eyes widened. He looked at her differently. By the end of the week, the tone of the group had shifted. Doubt had given way to curiosity, curiosity to respect. And yet, late at night in her barracks room, Sarah felt the hollow echo of doubt. Not about her skills, she knew now what she could do, but about identity. Who was she, really? Not a nurse, not a soldier, not officially anything but a civilian who carried her father's lessons into a world that usually demanded a uniform as entry. The thought gnawed at her. She didn't want to just be tolerated. She wanted to belong. One evening, after the course ended, she lingered on the empty range, staring at the targets peppered with holes. The sun sank low, painting the dirt gold. Jake's voice came back to her, steady in memory. "Don't underestimate what you've accomplished here today." But still she wondered, was it enough? Her father called that night. "How'd it go?" he asked, his tone casual but his silence heavy with care. "They listened," Sarah said softly. "They improved, they thanked me." "And you?" She hesitated. "I feel like I don't fit anywhere, not nursing, not military, just somewhere in between." His voice was quiet but firm. "You don't need a uniform to belong. You belong where your gift makes the most difference. The rest will catch up." She closed her eyes, let his words sink in. The next week another assignment came. Then another. DEA snipers in Texas. Marines in. An FBI team outside Chicago. Each course tested her, challenged her, forced her to prove herself again and again. And each time, she found herself rising to it. But with growth came weight. She could feel eyes on her, not just students, but commanders, contractors, decision-makers who whispered about the civilian instructor, who read wind like a weather map and broke egos with quiet truths. Opportunity was knocking louder, louder than she expected. One evening, sat across from her in a small, papers spread across the table. "Sarah," she said, "we want to expand. Precision Training Solutions needs a lead instructor, someone who can develop methodology, not just teach, someone who thinks differently." Sarah froze, lead instructor. The words felt unreal. I'm not, she began. Yes, you are, cut in, her voice sharp but kind. You've been proving it for months. The only question is whether you'll own it. Sarah stared at her hands, calloused now with faint lines from endless days on ranges. These weren't nursing hands anymore. These were teaching hands, guiding hands. She thought of her father's words, do the thing you can't walk away from. This was it. She lifted her head, Met's eyes. Yes, she said. And just like that, she stepped fully into it. No more split life, no more hesitation. But as she walked out of that, the night air cool against her skin, Sarah knew something else. Stepping fully into this world meant stepping into its shadows too. The doubts, the scrutiny, the weight of carrying lives in her hands, not as a medic, but as the one who prepared them before the fight. And in the quiet, when she lay in hotel rooms staring at ceilings, she asked herself the question that wouldn't let go. What if one day she wasn't enough? What happens when the world finally stops asking if you belong and starts depending on you? That question lay heavy on Sarah's chest as she walked the gravel path toward the range at dawn. The air was cool, the lights soft. A new group waited, men and women sharper than most, their eyes carrying the quiet of people who had already seen too much. Special operators from across branches, rangers, SEALs, HRT, all gathered for one course, all looking for something beyond repetition. And all looking, though they didn't know it yet, at her. She adjusted the sling over her shoulder, her notebook tucked under one arm. Once, that notebook had been filled with class notes about anatomy and pharmacology. Now, it held diagrams of wind funnels, ballistics calculations, drills she'd refined through trial, error, and observation. Words echoed, you're not just an instructor anymore, you're shaping how they learn. The thought both steadied and terrified her. The morning began like all the others. Introductions, skeptical glances, arms crossed, a few muttered words, she caught them even when they thought she couldn't. Civilian, never served. The sting was familiar now. It no longer burned, it fueled. She stepped forward, her voice even. You're not here to impress me. You're here to learn what keeps you alive. If you'll listen, I'll teach. If not, she shrugged faintly, the target will teach you instead. Silence, then slowly they uncrossed their arms. The first drill began, crosswinds, variable ranges, unknown distances. Sarah moved among them, her eyes scanning every detail, the angle of a shoulder, the tension in a grip, the flicker of frustration in someone's jaw. She corrected, explained, demonstrated. Hours passed. The sun climbed. Sweat darkened uniforms and tempers frayed. One operator, a ranger captain, cursed under his breath after another wide shot. Sarah crouched beside him. You're muscling it. Let the rifle rest in your bones, not your pride. He shot her a sharp look but obeyed. The next round landed true. His silence afterward was not doubt, it was respect. By late afternoon the air had changed. The resistance was gone. Questions came freely now. Students leaned closer when she spoke. But then everything stopped. An alarm blared from the far side of the facility. Radios crackled. Instructors exchanged sharp looks. Something was wrong. Moments later, a coordinator ran across the range, his face pale. Training accident, medical emergency on range 3. Instinct took over. Sarah dropped her notebook, sprinted with the others toward the distant berm. A young operator lay on the ground, unmoving, his weapon cast aside. A misstep, a fall from the platform, head struck hard. Medics were called, but seconds stretched like hours. Sarah knelt beside him without thinking, her nursing training flooding back. Airway, breathing, circulation. She checked pupils, stabilized his head, issued crisp instructions she hadn't spoken in months. Keep him still, monitor respiration, don't let him fade. Her hands moved steady, automatic, even as fear clawed inside her. This wasn't a drill. This was life, fragile and trembling in her grip. When the ambulance finally arrived, the medics repeated her assessments, nodding at the accuracy. The operator was loaded, stabilized, carried away. And only then did Sarah feel her own hands start to shake. The range was silent when she turned back, dozens of eyes on her, not for the shots she'd called, not for the corrections she'd made, but for the life she had steadied until help arrived. In that silence, something shifted. Because in that moment, she wasn't a civilian, she wasn't a nurse, she wasn't an outsider. She was simply necessary. That evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Jake found her sitting alone on the steps of the range office. He hadn't been part of this course, but he'd heard. Word always traveled. "You did good today," he said quietly, settling beside her. She shook her head. I remembered what I was taught, nursing my dad's lessons. It wasn't me, it was." "It was you," Jake interrupted, his tone steady. "Plenty of people freeze. You didn't. You carried him until help came. That matters." Her eyes burned. She blinked hard. "Sometimes I still feel like I don't belong here." Jake studied her. "Sarah, belonging isn't about patches or uniforms. It's about showing up when it matters, and you keep showing up." His words sank deep. She realized he was right. Belonging wasn't something given. It was proven moment by moment, choice by choice. And in her own quiet way, she had proven it. Weeks later, when the operator returned to training, alive, recovering, grateful, he sought her out, shook her hand, whispered, "Thank you." Sarah didn't know how to answer. She only nodded. Because it wasn't about thanks. It never had been. It was about the truth she had finally come to understand. She had once believed dignity spoke in titles: nurse, soldier, instructor, but now she knew better. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.